We're moving from that time where we got our illusion of security from money to a time when we get our security from a relationship with the land and a relationship with tribe. There's the imperative that, hey, this is smart. This is a safe way to live. This could give me more security, because everyone is going to do this. You might not want to be a prepper. Too bad. At some point when food gets expensive, when it prices you out of the market, when there's shortages, when there's far more shortages than there are now, it's just going to be economic. It's going to make sense. You're going to go to your neighbor. Oh, you've got some tomato seeds. We're going to transition into this lifestyle where we grow food.
Friends, it seems like big government, tech giants, and unelected oligarchs are trying to destroy America. And you can see the supply chain disintegrating across the planet. And one of these things that's going to fail along with that will be the food supply chain. Do you have enough emergency food? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. And give yourself the peace of mind knowing that you have storable foods. 20+ year shelf life allows you to make wise choices, be able to stay home, avoid the chaos. So head on over to foodwithadap2030.com and see what else My Patriot Supply has to keep your family's grand solar minimum prepared. And now on with the video. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad you're joining us today. I have with me Dan Schultz. You will remember Dan from about 3 years ago when I was still living overseas. We had the most intense conversation at that time about the onset and the intensification of the grand solar minimum, the cycles, but at the same time, the solutions that were sort of on the distant horizon of things that we would need to do in our lives or manifest in our lives or create in our lives. Fast forward a few years, seems like just minutes ago, and here we are again with this conversation about solutions and things we can do with all the problems that are happening across the planet that a lot of is out of our own control of our hands unless we unite as a species to stop certain agendas moving forward. But that's, a very large scope to consider. But what can you do around what you can touch with your hands, your neighbors, your communities, things that are close at hand for you to create your own solutions inside the chaos? And a lot of people are talking about the problem, and that's great because you have to understand the problem first to then create the solution. So that's what we wanted to do today. So you can get your fill of negative news. Just go on any news outlet, and there's a bucket full of miles deep of that. Today, we wanted to sort of talk about the base layer of what the problem is, and then how we can come up with a solution. So we wanted to keep it on a very positive note. So by the end of our conversation, you walk away knowing that you have the power of your own fate in your hands, at least of what you can touch around you. And the ideas of empowerment of your friends, your families, and others to create something larger than just yourself around the periphery. Gardening is one easy thing, but I mean, there's so many others that we're going to talk about today. And times are definitely shifting. It's not as if we were 3 years ago waiting for something to happen. It's in play at the moment. So it's quite a bit different conversation than a few years back of it's going to happen. You could do this. You might think about that, compared to, all right, it's in play. Now we must start to do these things to be able to give a larger safety net around us. Like for me, I'm growing my own garden. I got an orchard out here. I have my land really far out in the countryside, East Tennessee. And the closest big town is 3,000 people. So this is the kind of place I want to be, further away from society in terms of largeness and infrastructure and cities, etc., where well water, mini hydro coming off the streams here, food supplies, I got ample game, and the gardens. So I feel pretty well taken care of that if something happens. I would have several months of being able to figure it out because I prepared in advance versus being in a city, stuck in an apartment, something happens and you have 3 days worth of food and they're doing sweeps up and down through the buildings. That's a huge different thing. So how do we get ready and how do we prepare? Dan, I'm glad you're joining me because I know you're full of ideas. When I got your email, he's like, we got to talk about solutions. And I'm so happy we're talking about solutions versus just rehashing the same old problems that are here. Floor is yours. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, everybody feels what's going on. Everybody is unsettled. What's happening is really unprecedented in certain ways, from the censorship, this, you have focused on cycles for as long as I've been listening to you. And I have always been a believer in history repeating itself, in these cycles of human cycles to galactic cycles. And you'd mentioned earlier, we were talking privately, that there's this war cycle. I'm really not into astrology, David, but there's a cycle of Uranus when it transits Taurus every 84 years. 84 years ago, we had World War II. 84 years before that, we had the Civil War. And 84 years before that, we had the Revolutionary War. We have a war cycle coming up. And when you look at these, the grand solar minimum or the 12,000 year catastrophe cycle, this waning of our magnetosphere, it's all a really big deal. And so we have a situation, and I won't belabor the problems that we face. Really more important is, you have these people by the millions, by the tens of millions leaving cities right now. It's not like you and I have esoteric knowledge. People are exiting the system. And I've been talking about this, well, for years, about exiting the system. And the main reason I started talking about it is that people are dissatisfied with the system. 20, 30 years ago, we talked about how unsustainable our economic system is. We have an economic system based on infinite growth. What could go wrong there? It's an economic system based on parabolic sovereign debt, a fiat currency. What could go wrong? It's designed to fail. And then, we have an unsustainable agricultural system that depletes soils all across the board. And what I used to say is, do you know what unsustainable means? It means it's going to end. That's what it means. It's going to end. And so having some vision in your life and the foresight, which most people can see when you talked about collapse, even though Jared Diamond wrote an excellent book called Collapse, and people started catching on. When you talked about it 10 years ago, people kind of looked at you funny and went, oh yeah, 50 years, probably will. Now collapse is on the tips of everybody's tongue. You don't need a great imagination. In fact, you might argue, and many people are, that this is collapse. What we're seeing is collapse. So, what do you do? Do you move to Tennessee? Do you move up into the mountains? Do you go off grid?
I've had a few recollections in the last couple of weeks. I don't know, bolts from the blue, if you will, that have just set my mind a little more at ease about the transition of what we're entering and the cycles we're going through. Humanity has always been going through these cycles. Humanity always will go through these cycles. They're going to go through these transitions. A lot of them are fostered and put forth by elite to drive or move a society into the next set of control structures. one thing that's changing for sure is the sun. The electromagnetic frequency of the sun's changing. Now, if you want to get down to the basic science of it, the electromagnetic field is then changing the magnetosphere, and there's changes in our magnetic fields on the earth, or things are becoming much weaker, defense of particles and inbound ejected from the sun has a much greater effect. But again, that affects us as the human being also with our resonance field in the brain. So as the sun steps down, there's going to be an electrofrequency change. And the frequency change also needs to be matched in control structure here from the elite. So one thing that is just the easiest thing to pick out of an entire hayfield is the control down, the top down pyramidal structure that we have with central banking at the top, and then the militaries and all these different control systems within, from corporations and religions, etc., that keep everybody in their strata. That's going to need to change because the frequency from the sun is changing. So an old heavy frequency, a modular control like that of iron is not going to fit into a vibrating faster ethereal, let's say air, for an example. These are all parts of the changes that I continue to see with cycles on top of cycles. Like this control structure has been here for what? 8,000 years at least of the same players in the same positions of powers continue to control humanity moving through these changes and causing the changes in many ways, shapes, or forms. You know, Dan, you talked about the war cycle there for a second. That is so true. And if you trace that back, you keep going back through, and then there are overlaps in these grand solar minimums.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what was the recollection for me was that everything has been ongoing for more than 12,000 years, for millions of years, how humanity has come through these changes that are always ongoing. And the message for me was so stark and so clear was do the best you can right now to weather the changes, because that's all you really can do. The best you can do right now, and not living in fear, living your days, living the moments, living a life, because it's always in transition. And that really was kind of a powerful thought that came to me. You know, you mentioned running to the hills. Well, you could do that if you really love the outdoor lifestyle. You really love the pioneering lifestyle of going out and cutting wood, and make sure you got cords and cords and cords of wood to heat your house with a fire, and, you know, campfires here. And, you know, that if that's your style and you love it, invigorate yourself with it, dive into it 100%. And that's the thing, dive into it 100%, because that's all you can do is live your life at 100% of your potential and your passion right now through the changes. Because if you're going to be stuck out on the fear side of everything, waiting for the next thing, I got to respond to the stimulus. That's what's programmed, is you responding to the stimulus versus you just going 100% in on the way of life you want to live. And then the stimulus doesn't really affect you. The same way in the beginning of the program here, I'm sitting out at the middle of or not in the middle, but at the edge of a national forest in the middle of farm country in really remote East Tennessee. Things don't affect out here. Like I hear all these news and I watch the news because I do a lot of research for my videos, but I don't see it anywhere, shape, or form, anywhere remotely close out here. Even driving 25 miles in any direction, I see nothing happening.
Yeah.
So the little bubble I'm in, I'm living my passion out here. Everybody needs to do that.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned living in fear. You know, when we talk about whether it's the war cycle or the grand solar minimum, this historical fascism that is descending, I actually don't think of it as, oh, doom and gloom. Oh, look how bad things are getting. It's just a situation that we need to intelligently manage. So, you know, just like when I talk to people who had a corporate job, they had a cubicle and they worked in tech, or they worked in a factory and they hated their work. You know, that's a situation to manage. You can change all that. Now we have a situation where we're not even talking about future food shortages. Food shortages are happening now. You know, the United Nations said to expect famines of biblical proportions, we have a situation where there's a systematic takedown of our food system. So, all right, don't no need to cry or whine. What do you do about that? Having your own garden is a good place to start. Plopping like you did, plop some orchard trees down. Of course, the best time to plant an orchard, the old saying goes, 20 years ago.
Yeah, so true. So true. I put these dwarf species out here, and we tried to really inoculate the soil using all types of different medium, from mycorrhiza to kelp, and an enormous amount of other inputs into each hole to try to boost the root growth and then get these dwarf species to start fruiting out in the second or third year. We got some tiny fruits this year, but I cut everything off so it would go into root development. But you're right. I wish I would have planted this thing 5-10 years ago, 5 years ago. I wish I would have bought this land 30 years ago and had a massive working farm that produced for the community, because those that produce food are going to be the new banks of the era. Food is going to be the new valuable commodity and the new tradable economic medium of exchange. If you have food, they say money doesn't grow on trees. Okay, well, maybe it grows out of the ground now, because food is going to be worth money, or the opposite.
You betcha. Yeah. 13 years ago, I started my Maitreya Mountain Village, and we have 130 fruit and nut trees. About half of them are mature, and about half of them are coming into like 5-6 years old. So while I didn't plant them 20 years ago, we have an abundance. And, what I saw happening and what I responded to was not only the design system failure, but, I think there are two reasons to do what we are doing. There's the imperative that, hey, this is smart. This is a safe way to live. This could give me more security. I think we're transitioning from a time when we used to get if you had $1 million, you felt secure. Of course, I remind people that it's the illusion of security that you have if you have $1 million. It really is an illusion, but we feel secure if we have $1 million or $5 million. We're moving from that time where we got our illusion of security from money to a time when we get our security from a relationship with the land and a relationship with tribe. So, I just have come to the conclusion, David, that and most of this comes from, I lived with a couple of indigenous peoples for a while. And what I gleaned from that is that we are genetically hardwired. I don't think there's anything you can do about it. There's nothing you can do. We are all a little insecure. We don't know where our food comes from, literally. We don't have that deep relationship with the land that the indigenous peoples have. They have a sense of contentedness and wholeness that I honestly think that you and I and most people can't understand. I don't think we can deeply grok their sense of wholeness that they have by this relationship with tribe, everyone around them. They have it would be like asking a fish about water. They would say, what water? They trust all of those people. And from birth, they're surrounded by these people that have their backs. They have a sense of security that most Americans, the vast majority of us, just simply don't understand. And so I think part of the answer to go from this corporate cubicle or whatever job you don't like, or seeing the unsustainable world, is embracing those two principles. So, and when you involve yourself in permaculture, this answer, this sustainable agriculture, this relationship with the land that nurtures you and you nurture it, when you start doing it, one of the first things you realize quickly is that it's not meant for one person to do. It is not, there's a reason why. the kibbutz and the commune and the tribe and communities. There's a reason why the Amish all live together, is that first and foremost, it's efficient. It's just plain old efficient.
That's true. You know, even with two people trying to just do the daily chores and get the garden, even to go pick the food that you're going to prepare for your meal and
Yes.
trim out enough leaves so there's more airflow. Like example, the tomatoes, it rained for the last 5 days and, you know, the bottom leaves were getting a little mucky down there. So to go in and trim out, you know, 40 tomato plants and, you know, get the airflow going again, plus get the tomatoes, plus get the lettuce, wash everything up, get it, prepare it. That takes a couple hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, you got to think about what we don't have as a skill set, which is taught to many, you say people that are in tune with the land, is the wild foraging. Because, you know, if you
Yes.
dropped a city person out here, they would miss a lot of the foods that I've been learning how to do wild foraging here in the Southeast. Now, for me, I'm trying to turn it into that forest equals food, and I know where to look for the food. And I'm starting to identify a lot of low-hanging fruit, no pun intended, of just easy
Yeah.
things to identify that you always know: the plantains, the muscadines, the leaves that you can eat off certain types of trees in the year, the different weeds that are edibles,
Absolutely.
the things, grasses that are edibles with the seed, the cattail. I mean, this gamut of stuff you could walk by as long as you have a clean water source. Like where's all spring-fed ponds out here. To get that wild foraging mentality as well, in addition to what you're growing or where you can accrue at the supermarkets while they're still functional. And I might want to add one thing here. Get what you can while the supply chains are still running, because I just did a video yesterday on Union
Absolutely.
Pacific Railroad is going to suspend all traffic from the West Coast eastbound for 7 days. Now, this agri system we have, they've had such a terrible year so far for the droughts and then the flooding and off season and shrunken growth seasons and freezes late. They're going to need a lot of potash to put in right about now to get any kind of yield coming out of the fields. Well, you need rail delivery for that, because potash you sell by the ton. So to delay even deliveries of simple inputs into this mega agri business that we need, like potash at this time of the year, that's going to delay the crop yields, or even diminish crop yields by a week delay of getting potash out to the farmers. So like you say, it seems that's a purposeful thing. And I'm really wondering, you know, Union Pacific states that it's lack of rail cars, like they're having a rail car shortage, labor shortage. Okay, where's all that going to? Because my thing is, you had enough rail cars to sustain our life all the way up until last year. Massive collapse in usage across the economies of the world. But there still should be the same number of rail cars laying around pre-pandemic, pre-collapse time. Now, where'd all the rail cars go to?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or are
Same
they
place
being
to
packed and
change
then put
shortage.
underground for continuity of government? And they need those same laborers that know how to run the rail cars and move the rail cars, just in a different place right now. So there's a shortage out here in the real world, but the continuity world over there is getting all the resources diverted for 7 days, like millions of tons of cargo, plus all the laborers to really know how to move those cars and get the cargo off the cars and then put them in the right place. Labor shortage and rail car shortage means that whole system is being diverted elsewhere outside of our visual spectrum.
You know, I touching on something you just said about foraging and the food. I watched a movie. What was that? The Road. Do you remember The Road?
I do remember that was really, after I watched that movie, I had weeks of thoughts after watching that.
Yeah.
Weeks of thought had come back to me.
Yeah,
Like,
I
would it
did-
really be like that? Yeah. What if you do find one of
Exactly.
those bunkers that's all full of toothpaste, candles, and yummy foods? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, what was wrong with that is, you know, as him and his son were wandering the road, and they were going through candy vending machine and Coke machines, and is that there's so much forage. I mean, I live in the rainforest, so we have mega abundant mushrooms. The natives in this area, the Tolowa and the Yurok, got most of their calories from acorns. Are a tremendous source of food. You know, we have 160 acres in our place, and we have literally thousands and thousands of tan oaks. And between mushrooms and tan oaks and huckleberries and all of the other things that are available, you know, they're wandering around, and they preface the movie The Road with the animals are all gone and there's food systems, but there is food all around us. And
everywhere.
it's so valuable to understand plantain and dandelion and all of the things that are just readily available. And I agree with you. Yeah, I've been saying for years that everything is on sale, and it's still on sale, even though we've had inflation. Everything is on sale right now, um, largely because it won't be available. The systems are breaking down, whether it's the rail cars. Um, there's a change short. I talked to somebody at the bank the other day, and I said, really, I needed some quarters. No quarters. And I looked at the gal, and she looked back at me and she goes, yeah, it's all staged. And I said, really? You work here at the bank, you think that, huh? She goes, oh, it can't be. How can all of a sudden, she goes, I know too much about this. Uh, you know, this system is not going to, we've lived, you and I know you lived in Asia for a while where it's a bit different, but most people in America, we've just lived these cushy lives. We go to a grocery store and there's a mountain of food, just a mountain. And we can choose, oh, today I feel like we've been spoiled. We have been pampered. We've lived this decadent abundance, this little tiny blip in history where people could retire on a golf course. This has never happened in history unless you were a king. We've lived this little tiny microcosm, and it's ending. So you're going to see that in the fact that farmers are having a hard time getting tractor parts. There's a domino that's falling. Change shortage in this digital currency. There's a domino that's falling. These dominoes that are falling are huge. They're 6-ton monoliths. There's nothing to stop them. And just like the fascism, there are cycles. And you look at history, whether you're reading Orwell or Huxley, this does not end well. We need to be prepared for the changes that are happening.
I've talked about having governments prep out and start to think about moving different crop species further south, about 600 miles further south, based on past cycles. So in the last 150 years, our climate's been incredibly stable, where we've figured out these grow zones in the plant and the harvest times based on a stable climate system that had existed for, several generations, 5, 6
Yes.
generations or longer. But that's coming to an end now, where you're starting to see, as the sun steps down, these jet streams are going to move into different places, and the cloud cells are bunching on each other, and we're getting these massive rain out events, which I'd said were going to happen because you can't have cloud cells bunching on each other and cosmic rays creating new cloud layers, and you're not going to get an enormous amount of rainfall. You're going to get biblical amounts of rainfall, and it's just what they talked about. And it's really about reading a history book.
Yeah.
Because if you look, you can find a lot of almanacs going back, say, 1800 years or so, of weather event almanacs, and it could be a monastery had written something down, the crown something, an entry of a crown agent or whatnot that had described a weather event for an insurance loss for something. And how many navies there have been, from the Dutch Navy and going around, good records for the last 600 years. But then the records kept getting better from, say, 1400 coming to present day.
Yeah.
And you can just start to map out, okay, massive rains here, massive rains there, overlapping on when these cycles occur. And one thing that did keep occurring was this massive amounts of rain and massive hailstones. So you can just guarantee that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And just some other things that are going to happen is governments are going to be, changed because they can't provide for their citizens anymore. And it seems that the governments now are taking the citizens by the horns instead of letting the other way. Usually it's the other way around. Government can't provide for the citizens because of lack of food, so the citizens require a change in government. Well, this time it seems like government's grabbing the citizens first so they can't have a chance to go that direction over food, where everything's getting clamped down, locked down. Everybody's being corralled through a chute to completely control their access to food. And if you notice, since 9/11, this whole mechanism that's out there is just waking everyday state, from cameras to militarization of police. Everything's on top so that assets have been placed in advance this time to stop the citizenry, all 8 billion, asking for change. And then on top of that, you
Yes.
start putting all these things that change the mind of the person into not community organization, but individual fracturing and dark energies and these thoughts that are not positively resonating in people. And it seems that it's the reverse this time of what's happening because of the
You betcha.
technology.
Yeah. It's a controlled demolition. They've gotten smarter. They know, the people at the top have all the information that you and I have. They know
Way more.
about they probably got AI programs and so much more detail. They know how this is going to collapse. And, whether it's the food system, whether it's the depleting of the soils, the financial system, whether it is this war cycle, they know, and anybody can do this. Anybody can open up the history books. You look at the 1600s, from 1645 to 1715. You can look at some of the ancient Chinese records. You did a great job of documenting the fall of Chinese dynasties during these climatic cycles. What really happens is the sun. As David says, it's not you, it's not CO2, it is the sun. And they know about these sun cycles. And what happens is there's a worldwide decline in food production. That has happened. We're years into worldwide decline. So what they're doing is they're controlling it. Instead of having it collapse and reacting to it, hungry people, they don't like governments that don't provide food. They are controlling this collapse. It's a controlled demolition. So once you see that, you too can be like the governments, and instead of being reactive, you can be proactive. That's what I'm proposing. And to pick up on the thread that I was mentioning earlier, we're in the spirit of finding great people who want to do what we're doing. We've got our 160 acres, it's in the mountains. We've got gravity-fed water systems. It's one of the advantages of living in the mountains. We're looking for people that want to do it because it's smart, but really what we want is people who are doing it for the good reasons, what I call the good reasons, because it's soulful work. It's healthy to do that. When you know exactly where your food comes from, there's something super satisfying. I had some guests come through a few weeks ago, and they were interviewing me on our sustainable living project. And they said, it kind of surprised me. And they said, what is the deepest lesson you've learned in doing this? Like, I surprised myself by saying, off the cuff, it's that when you plant the apple tree and you fertilize it, we fertilize with wood ash and human manure, and you cultivate it, and then 10 years later you pick the apple and you eat it. And then we use composting toilets. So you go in the toilet, you compost that, you put it on the apple tree, you eat the apple. There's this cycle that everyone knows about intellectually, but you're really a part of the earth. It's super deep. It's super satisfying. You eat the apple with a smile on your face, far more so than when you go to the grocery store and buy an organic apple, or even if you buy it from a farmer, when you create it. And so there's just something beautiful about it, that I have this appreciation for the lifestyle and the project of being smart about what's happening in the world.
So true. And as you plant, as we were learning with the tiniest of seeds, like arugula, for example, before we put a little bit too much seed out and became such a giant overgrown forest of arugula that it almost grew too fast and we weren't able to utilize it. And a lot of it went to seed and bolted, and that's great. We got in a little bit extra seed. But learning that skill set of putting deep beds of mulch down and really being precise with the seed placement to get rows and just doing it better each time and being able to produce more in a smaller space faster and more easily with less work. It's like a Rubik's cube of you, nature, and the plants. And then each day, and if you go away for 2 or 3 days and you come back and you notice how much it's grown, and that, picking our own tomatoes, we got about 10, 15 pounds of tomatoes, 10 or 12 pounds. I didn't put it on the scale, but it was 2 giant bowls from just yesterday of reds, purples, and sandwich tomatoes. We got a bunch of different types and the aromas and whatnot. Yeah, the spinach. Yeah, the same way. The arugula is the spinach, and I'm growing Gynura, which is a longevity herb, and trying to get that in the right place and figure out where the sun's correct in the mornings, and 2 different gardens in different shade locations and these different things.
No, that's what I'm talking about. Your Gynura is the Japanese spinach.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah, and there's several different types, and you can order that online. In Asia, it's quite easy to find. It's everywhere. Any gardener pretty much has it. You can go to any grandma over there, and she has Gynura. You can pinch off one and then go home, pot it, and it'll start growing. While out here in the U.S., it's quite more difficult to find. So I ordered mine online. They sent it to me wrapped up in some wet paper, and then I ended up planting it out. I got probably about 90% to take. But then you got to think about Moringa oleifera, the Gynura, and then I would say spirulina algae, because you can buy the bulk, like 4 pounds or 5 pound bag, 1 pound bag, whatever. But you got to think about these micronutrients and superfoods as we're moving through, because that's going to be a lot of what your diet is lacking for most people. Is going to be the micronutrients, minerals, and vitamins that keep your brain, and then also the fats. So when I see a thing of duck fat or goose fat or lard, I'll pick up an extra 1 or 2, because that will stay good in a temperature controlled environment, especially in a sealed container. And, lard, my grandma used to cook with lard, so I'm familiar with it. If you never use lard, then it's going to be a brand new animal for you. And you'd be like, what is this white stuff that melts when you put it in the pan? Like if you didn't grow up with that and you didn't have grandmas from the 1940s and whatever that used to cook home style, like saving bacon grease and, rendering fat and these kind of things are going to be foreign concepts to you. But you're going to need to learn them, because keeping your brain full of fat and nutrients and vitamins so you can think correctly. When others are malnourished, they're going to be making mistakes. They're going to be slow. They're not going to be cognitively as fast as you are. So think of it as being like the ultimate nootropic is keeping your brain at optimum functionality with what you put into it with food. When others are going to be lacking food, there's going to be a night and day difference on how people are going to start operating, especially when food gets more expensive. People are going to start moving down the chain of value into junk food after junk food. Now, I eat and experiment with a lot of canned foods, mixing in fresh vegetables, because, in reality, people who do get ready for some of these changes are going to have a lot of canned foods. But I'm telling you from experience, you absolutely cannot continue to eat that stuff day upon day, meal upon meal as your main base of food source. You will absolutely need fresh to go in there. It's so sodium laden. And you can just taste, you get a difference in the feeling of the body. Go ahead and eat all your prep foods for 3 meals a day for 3 days and see how you feel. You're going to get sluggish. You're just not going to have that optimum, unless it's really good it's really good prepared foods with the optimum calories and everything else you need inside there. But existing off cans of beans and, powdered this and boxed that.
Yeah. I'm glad you're going over a lot of the details of how. I think because everyone is going to do this. You might not want to be a prepper. Too bad. At some point, when food gets expensive, when it prices you out of the market, when there's shortages, when there's far more shortages than there are now, it's just going to be economic. It's going to make sense. You're going to go to your neighbor. Oh, you've got some tomato seeds. We're going to transition into this lifestyle where we grow food. When food prices double, triple, quadruple, tenfold, we're all going to do this. So we may as well start. My suggestion is it's a matter of degree. I think a lot of people, and we have We have a thriving Airbnb eco cabin rental thing at our place. It's one of our connections to the economy, but it brings people in and they can see how we're growing food and how they can, wow, I can do that. You know, hey, I could get some chickens. Chickens are easy. And my suggestion to them is just start. It's Bill Mollison's, I think it's his fourth permaculture principle. The principle that he outlines, it's called obtain a yield. Just obtain a yield. That's the intention. And just start. It's only a matter of degree. So to the degree that you've exited the system will be to the degree that you're free. To the degree that you've exited the system is the degree that you will have a certain security and health and contentedness. And so my suggestion to people is just start, just obtain a yield. Go buy some tomato plants and plop them in the ground. And then, like my favorite permaculture guy, Sepp Holzer, says, observe and you'll learn. And in a way, nobody can. We live off grid. We have solar panels, we have gravity fed water systems, we don't have a utility bill. And even us, we're not completely independent from the system. In a way, nobody can completely leave the system. You got to pay property tax. Even if you go find some BLM land, you probably want to fly out east to go to a funeral, or you need insurance for your car. We're going to have a foot in the door of the system. I think of it as bridging. We're bridging from the unsustainable to the sustainable. And it's a matter of degree. To the degree that you exit that system and become self-sufficient, is the degree that you'll be satisfied.
Yeah, and I might add that we were considering doing chickens this year because the person I bought the land from had left an old chicken coop out the back. It's 20 feet long, 12
Nice.
feet wide. And it was kind of, I wouldn't say in disrepair, but it needed a lot of work to bring it back up to a chicken coop. So we decided to take the wire off the outside. And since it was slanted roof, put the couplers back on and put the 4x4s and connect it, make it even, and then just used cattle panel, and we're turning it into a greenhouse.
Yeah.
We're going to get into chickens next year, but to have a greenhouse during this time that's within eyesight of our house right here, really easy to get the water up there, because we were considering building another greenhouse, but on the back property where we'd need an extra electrical pump. We'd have to run extra electrical wires up there. And it's just something real quick, easy, and functional that we can get started this first year to have a greenhouse so we can get everything ready to put out into the fields faster next year. And also through the winter, still to be able to grow the microgreens, still be able to have harvests off of the Gynura and all these other plants growing in pots in the greenhouse. So taking it to the next step of thinking about, all right, during the winter, yeah, we can have our winter veggies outside. We got the kales and the mustards and these types of things, the heavy leafy greens that love those cold temperatures, the cabbages and thing. But then we also want to have more supple greens that can be grown in a greenhouse, and it only, a 20-pound LNG cylinder, and you can, have a small heater in there. And we could probably, with that, we can even run a 100-foot extension cord up in there and bring a heater in there. That's how close it is. And, we're looking at functionality of putting thousands and thousands of extra dollars of running electrical cables up and then constructing the thing for an extra $10,000, $12,000, or starting off real small so we can make the mistakes close to home here, if you will.
You betcha.
Then scale it up the next year, because you're right. It's all about getting something, seeing your results, getting the yield in, and then improving it from right then. And then, well, okay, so we did a small greenhouse. It worked. We learned these mistakes. Now what happens when you go to the bigger one? Then what?
The value of bringing agriculture indoors in greenhouses. We're actually right now putting together a 4,000 square foot. It's an earthship style. It's earth sheltered, earthship in its design greenhouse that we have Moringa oleifera. Moringa is an amazing plant. And we have mangoes and lemons and limes and avocados. And because as this climatic change happens, And as we want to create even more diversity and stability, there's only so you can't grow mangoes where I'm at in the mountains, but you can indoors, and that variety is something that when you do start producing your own food, you know, we do go to the grocery store at our place. We do, especially in the winter, but we don't have to. And I run that simulation all the time. What happens, the World Economic Forum is promising us a cyber attack. They're almost guaranteeing it. What happens when the lights go out and there's no gas, there's no grocery stores? What happens if we have a solar flare and it melts every copper wire on the planet? With our magnetosphere, that is possible. I think it is valuable to run these simulations in our minds. What happens if there's war and an EMP or whatever it is? What happens? How do we? And practicing, whether it's canning or smoking or salting, we have a root cellar for this purpose. One of the things is that our food, our diet will actually probably improve because I'm not going to have much chocolate. Although I do have I do have a couple of cacao plants that aren't producing yet. But, our diet is going to be limited. We're going to have a much narrower and probably a healthier diet for most people. But you really want that diversity. And a greenhouse is something that adds that diversity and a lot of security.
How about a Faraday root cellar? You can keep your
Faraday
electronics
root
safe
cellar.
and your food at the same time. You need
Wow.
if you're going to be, as long as you can ground out, that's the whole
another
thing,
level.
and those two super flares that came off the sun on the opposite side of the sun just a
Yeah.
few days back, I was watching Ben Davidson's video analysis of
Yeah.
that over at Suspicious Observers. And he was saying that, he was considering the next 20 years a 10% possibility of a massive CME coming in and frying, like you say, an enormous amount of electrical infrastructure on the planet. But now he's ticked that up to 25% possibility.
Yep.
And that's a huge jump for, somebody that's pretty conservative on their calls. Ben and I have argued back and forth about the onset and the, intensification of the grand solar minimum, which solar cycles are going to be, how intense it's going to be, and all these things back and forth. But that's a huge statement for him to go from 10% to 25%. That you have no idea what a gigantic jump that is. That is a massive jump.
Yeah. Ben's very conservative. So when he says something like that, it means something. And we need to move forward and, find people, especially as everyone is divided and everyone is scared. And people have this deer caught in the headlights look right now.
They do.
I look around, you go into town and they're not sure what to do. And I think the first thing is we find like minds. We need to know that we're not, first of all, people like you and I, generally, we feel alone. And one of the first things we can do in this times of turbulence, however you see it, even if you believe in global warming, is to find our tribe more than ever before. We need to find our tribe. We need to find our people. We come together. It's the new math of 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 15.
It does, especially when you're getting into the farm work and you're trying to divide tasks. We were doing it out here. Somebody came out and stayed with us for a little while, and having 3 people compared to 2 people, that extra one person, they're full of energy and they're just go on this extra one task, while the other 2 are getting just the basic task done. For every one extra person you have, not only can they do an enormous amount of things, trimming, pulling, pruning, helping, cleaning, whatever, but then if you get 2 people, then that amplifies that secondary task need out there. And just to put it into perspective here, everywhere you look, they're talking about supply chain breakdowns. Now, most people would just of the mind frame think, all right, well, my local Costco is not going to have things. My Home Depot might run out of stuff. Joe's hardware store over there is getting low on supplies. But what entails the supply system, or the supply chain system as we know it, is Everything that goes into the mega agribusiness that gets the food to your table is that supply chain also. People are so focused on the screwdrivers disappearing out of Home Depot that they're missing the amount of fertilizer that's going over to the tractors that now don't have parts.
Yeah.
And I was mailing a box to Asia just last week, and I used to remember that it went sea, land, air, or a combination of sea and land, or you could send it air. And they have these different categories and pricing depending on if you could wait a month for delivery, you could send it really cheap. That is no longer an option. I talked to the guy at the post office, and he said from now on, they're only offering air cargo, only through the US Postal Service overseas. And I said, that's really strange. It's like, yeah, well, the ports are shutting down, right? And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, the ports are inefficient now, and they're having so many accidents of the workers there, and everything's banging up, and containers are smashing into each other all over. The ports are really slowed down because of accidents from the people. Either they're not really trained, but they're forcing them to work over shifts and working them, and they haven't really worked at those kind of speeds and efficiencies before of new people coming on the job or whatever. But something's wrong with the ports. So then now the US Postal Service has shifted completely to air. That was a huge flag for me, going, whoa. And a guy telling me this in the Postal Service that the ports are all messed up, that they're going to go air from now on. That's a huge something happened there. So think about supply chains well beyond what's going to be stocked in your Walmart in terms of, bits and trinkets of junk coming from China. Way beyond that, it is the actual mechanisms that get the food planted and harvested and into your belly. That's the supply chain that you need to be most concerned about. That's also lumped in with supply chain shortages. But the business cycle and MSNBC only want to focus on, the pillows are coming low because there's no cotton sheets from this country now, because the factory shut down in Bangladesh or something.
I think it's so valuable to have these conversations because it's hard. We all have a normalcy bias. Life has been so easy. I think I'll retire. There's not going to be any retirement for anybody. just get used to it. This is not going to happen. Our lifestyles are going to change, period. Our lifestyles are not going to have the decadence. We're not going to have, maybe, very possibly, and I might argue inevitably, we're not even going to have some of our basic needs met. And so this conversation about the different parts, and the different mechanisms and how they're breaking down and what this means, it is so valuable to understand that, because then we can accept. Maybe you accepted it 30 years ago when you understood how Social Security and Medicare had to work. But now, if you keep up, and I implore my own listeners to David Dubine's Adapt 2030, Ice Age Farmer. These are great channels to listen to. They catalog this those actual mechanisms and how they're breaking down and the changes that are occurring. If you know about these changes, then you can be smart about it. Yeah, I have so much appreciation for what you've done, David.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Because that's the kind of thing that keeps me going, is people saying, it helped my life, or
you betcha.
My family is much more well prepared now, and we think we can get through this because we found your channel last year, 2 years, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But you have two ways to approach this right now, and what you just said is so true. Like, things are changing now, and the change mechanisms in play. So you have two ways to approach it. You can either embrace the change and then roll with it, and find that freedom in your life of preparing your own foods, having your community, changing your lifestyle to ways that where you have much more, input into the passion of your life versus, like you say, stuck in a cubicle. Or you can sit on the other side of the spectrum going, oh no, life is happening to me, not from my input. It's just everything slamming me negative. Oh, they're going to mandate this. You need the pass to go there. You're going to have to do this. I need my kids to do that. I can't move here. I can't go travel there. I can't do this. Oh, poor me. Mm-hmm. You got two choices in this. And this, elitist club of, like you say, World Economic Forum, they have told you the broadcast of where they want to take society. Now, I'm not a fan of this. I believe that if 8 billion people started resonating their thought frequencies in a different way, they would be relegated to the dustbin of history. So they do not want the organization of peoples, regardless of your skin color. They want that. That's how they divide. And now it's the division of your socioeconomic strata. Oh, he's making too much money. She's making too much. Oh, it's a they are taking. Oh, they got to be a multi-sex thing. Oh, now it's broken down into this, that, and the other. Oh, and every way that they can divide humans so we can't connect anymore, because the changes in the sun are going to allow our capabilities of manifestation to occur faster and at a more powerful level. So the more that we change in our manifestation capabilities of creating the reality around us, the more these elitists want us far apart. Like I saw this Australian article just yesterday where they said, you can't leave your homes and you can't even have a conversation with anybody. If you see anybody that you can't even talk to them. Don't talk to them. Stay 100% apart. Like, what are they so terrified of people having conversations about now? Where they're dissuading you or even telling you you're not allowed to have a conversation with another person. If they see you in a park outdoor, even though you both have the coverings on, they're still going to come and separate you, fine you, arrest you, because you're just having a conversation, even though you might be 12 feet apart, 15 feet apart.
Yeah, they're trying to control the situation.
Yeah, you come at it two ways. You embrace the changes and know these changes are here. And if you can do the best you can to get through these on your own, outside the cities and outside the system, I think you're going to be quite okay, because that's the direction they want. This World Economic Forum crowd wants to take it. Everybody into self-sustainability, everybody off the fossil fuels, everything back to nature. And if you're moving that direction already, you're kind of going to the direction that is planned for people to be moved to in the end result. Now, the nefariousness of how they're doing it is quite something else that I don't agree with. So when you come at it, like the way they're doing it for this control mechanism to try to herd everybody, I don't know. It's just like this. Like, you see the African savanna animals, and they're all out there and they're doing their yearly migrations. And the lions and the other predators are quite good at herding the animals to go a certain direction, because then they're setting up the traps. But there's a segment of those animals that are like, we see through you lions. We're going to go to the left over here. Everybody else is going right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like what they're doing already for society. Like, the people who already escaped out here to the countryside, we're going to be the last people touched, the last people affected. They're going for the cities first. And if you think they're not, I'm sorry, you're not awake, or you're completely dismissing the fact of things that are happening right now. You need to get self-sufficient and super fast. And Dan, I'm going to add one last thing. Like, how do you get to these communities? Because people like myself and others around here are kind of leery of just letting any old person come in that's not, hey, I want to join. Hey, I want to come in and work on the land. Okay. But yeah, there's 500 other people behind you that said the same exact thing. So how do you, there's a huge, I should say, like, tippy-toey, touchy factor going on out here in the countryside of, there's an enormous amount of people want to get out here, whoever was here already. And now there's a tidal wave of people want to come out. So A, where are these communities? And then B, how do you choose who you might have come out and stay on your property out there and then help? And how do you get this trust factor built in versus somebody out of desperation versus somebody who really has a skill set that wants to become part of this thing building for the future?
I studied communities before I started this project. I went to visit 26 communities and I spoke to over 150. And the first thing is you need to have an application process. And after you do it for a while, we have 35 to 50 woofers per year. We just opened it up during the pandemic to long-term membership. So we've had this application in play for 10 years anyways. And that's what it's all about. I have found this whole pandemic thing, I have found it to be fascinating. It is such a sociological experiment in demographics, in the psychology of it. It's just been and it's better, it's more suspenseful than any novel or Hollywood movie. I can't wait to see what's gonna, and I was really curious, like, things have lightened up this summer. And Howard, you know what? I find that most people they know this isn't over. They're not like, oh, okay, everything's back to normal. That is not what's happened with the general population in my area anyways. They're like, you know what? They are waiting for the other shoe to drop. They don't know what it is. They don't know how it's going to play out, but everybody knows the collective consciousness. I believe we are all psychic. We all pick up on that collective consciousness, and everybody knows this isn't over. And so, hey, I can round out our conversation by just saying, you know what? Find your people, find all the people that you're congruent with, that you think you can live with, that you can, marry your fortunes together, all of your human resources, and make it happen with your tribe. It's time for tribe.
Yeah, it certainly is. And that's a great way to put it, because if you're listening to this broadcast, you need to be in motion right now, not thinking of, oh, could I maybe next week, next year, let's think about it in a few months. It's like you need to be actively getting your way out of the cities that you might be in.
Yeah.
The suburbs are a different sort of half step out to the countryside.
Yeah.
But as I was, talking with somebody else, you could be remote way out in the countryside. And when I say that, I mean, you could be in the middle of a national forest of full pine trees where you're 35 miles down a dirt road living with Sasquatch up in the pine trees, that you are not around anybody, but there's going to be no farming community. There's going to be nowhere for you to grow food except for what you grow. Or you can be incredibly remote out in the middle of a farming area. And that's a hugely different thing. Both are incredibly remote. Both are kind of at the end of the road, 3 turns down to the end of the road, down in a cul-de-sac, and then up a gravel road somewhere. But the access to food and community versus being way out by yourself, way out in the middle of like the forest, so far at the end of a login road, way out there. I mean, they're both remote, but that's a far removed step from suburbs. So you're going cities, suburbs, countryside.
And that's what we'll do. We'll have our immediate family, we'll have our community, and then we'll have our extended communities, and learning from other farmers that have done it and know the soil and the land and the climate and the cycles. We will all need to learn from each other.
So true. And Dan, tell us, I'm really more interested, and I know everybody else is, tell us how we can look up some information, find you, scope out what you've done. Let's see what you've done out on your homestead out there and your project and your acreage. That way, visually, if people can see it's been and has been done by another person, they get much more excited that if they can do it, I think I can do it too.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you can look at our website, which is maitreyamountainvillage.com.
Yeah. Can you spell that out for us?
Maitreya, Maitreya, Mountain Village. Maitreya is a Sanskrit word that means friendship and loving kindness. I just happened upon that word one day, and I just went, wow, that's got to be a big answer to all of our problems. If like Dalai Lama said, he said, my religion is kindness. I just love that. So Maitreya Mountain Village is our sustainable living project. It's 160 acres and surrounded by a national forest. Up here in the very northwestern tip of California, about 20 miles from the ocean. We got the redwoods here, the Smith River Canyon. It's really beautiful.
I think that's going to be important. People's exercise capability, either running from threats of danger or running to and address an emergency and being able to help by sprinting somewhere to help with an emergency, And
even the endurance of being able to walk 20 miles, to have the fitness to, the new high intensity interval training is where it's at as far as, increasing our heart variability. It's such a meter of health. And it's time for that. It's time to stop indulging and stop eating Cheetos and to get healthy and fit, and so that we all can be potent, so we can handle the challenges that are here for us.
Again, I've been talking with Dan Schultz, and I hope you got something out of our talk today that can help you move forward in your lives. Really know that you can create something and you don't have to be stuck in this fear. The fear is for you to maybe fall into that trap, but know that there's edges of that trap that you can grab onto, climb out of it, and you just don't have to fall in there, that there's other ways to live, other ways to exist. and
Very much.
fulfill yourself. And I don't know if this is a planned push for humanity to make us all move that direction of fulfilling and following dreams, or getting stuck in the fear. And those that break out of that chrysalis are welcome to do whatever they want to do. And everybody else will be like the control mechanism. The mind is only in the cities. And if you do get out, they'll be unharassed out in the countryside. I'm not sure how it's going. I'm just throwing an idea out there. But anyway, do appreciate you for joining us today. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment box below. And hopefully Dan and myself will be jumping through there to look and see what people's comments are. And as always, reach out to Dan if you have any more questions about their project on property. And as well, out here in East Tennessee, we're looking for some people to stay out with us. So appreciate your time. Bye for now.
Thank you much.